The editorial board at the New York Post believes that landlords are going to let their buildings decay because the rent raise that was given to them by the Rent Guidelines Board isn't enough to cover the rising cost of inflation. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I'm going to be going over an article today from the editorial board at the New York Post. As you know, obviously the New York Post is a more conservative paper, and they do more conservative articles than like the New York Times, for example, which is known to be very far left-leaning, much more progressive. Okay, so they looked at the rent raise that was given to landlords by the Rent Guidelines Board, that I believe said 3.25% for 1-year leases and then up to 5% for 2-year leases, right? They looked at that and they said, hey, honest truth, it doesn't make much sense when inflation was at 8.6%. This is exactly what I pointed out in the video that I made covering that rent increase. This is why I said, hey, people are saying this is a victory for landlords because, they finally get to raise their rents. And I'm like, well, this isn't a victory. This is still a loss, okay? Even if they had been able to raise their rents by 8.6%, that doesn't cover all of the years prior to that where they were given minuscule raises. And what it really falls down to is they need to get rid of rent control altogether. They need to be allowed to rent their apartments out and their units out for the market rates. But the reason that isn't going to be done is because this place, they've basically locked in these tenants into these lower cost rents, and now those tenants, that's their voting pool. Okay, they're never going to vote to get rid of their own low rents. It's a bad situation, and there's no way out of it for them at this point, at least not politically. Anyway, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, okay? Do you think that New York is headed back to the bad old days of the 70s and 80s with, buildings basically dilapidated and falling apart? I don't know. I mean, honest truth, okay? I think that the big corporate players, right, the ones who are, they have big sums of money, they're going to be just fine. But we know that not all landlords are these huge corporate landlords. A lot of them are small mom and pop, owners. Some of them are just smaller companies, and they can't last unless they're able to, not only pay for all of the repairs and maintenance and keep the building in good shape, but also make a profit. And if they don't make a profit, then there's no reason for them to stay in the business, okay? So the last thing I want to see is we got a lot of renters up in New York, and then they're just living in the worst, awful conditions possible just because they want to save some money on rent. That's dumb as hell. You're living in, places that are falling apart, unsafe, rat infested, etc. Because you're like, well, I can't move. I'm basically trapped in here because this is the only rent I can afford. And, the landlord won't fix the place because obviously the landlord doesn't have any money. So let's get into this article. It's coming from the New York Post, like I said, and it says, opinion. With rent hikes capped far below inflation, Mayor Adams is right. The system's broken. Yeah, system's broken. The whole rent control system is broken. Are the members of the city's Rent Guidelines Board aware that inflation is now at 8.6%? If so, what were they thinking Tuesday when they limited rent hikes to just 3.25% for 1-year leases and 5% for 2-year leases? Indeed, the caps, which apply to the city's 1 million rent-stabilized apartments, are so out of line with real-world market conditions that they're liable to do significant harm to both tenants and landlords. The RGB's 5-member majority might have thought it struck the right balance. Tenant activists wanted lower caps, while landlords sought higher ones. But that was a political calculation, not one that took into consideration the economic fallout. Yeah, and that's the problem with the Rent Guidelines Board, okay? They put in place basically rent increases that were political and had nothing to do with the actual economy of the country, nothing to do with anything other than, well, we feel that it wouldn't be right to have the tenants pay more. Well, your feelings have absolutely zero to do with the economy. Okay, that's kind of like a company that is literally going bankrupt because they have too many employees working there, but they feel it would be bad if the employees lost their jobs, right? So they, don't lay off those employees, and guess what? The entire company goes down. The entire company is bankrupt now, and everyone loses their jobs instead of the ones that they were just going to lay off before. That is dumb, but that is exactly what this Rent Guidelines Board is doing, essentially, with their caps on these rent increases. They're going to take down these landlords. They're going to lose the housing altogether. Okay, or if the housing is able to stay up, then it's going to be in horrible condition. That's not what we want to see happen, but that is that is the result of the policies that they are pushing. After all, how are landlords supposed to make ends meet when their costs are rising faster than rent revenue thanks to such limits? And this comes after the de Blasio years when rents were actually frozen or limited by minimal rent hikes, and after months during the pandemic when owners went with no rent income at all thanks to the eviction moratorium. Yeah, I brought up in another one of my videos, right, that believe it or not, okay, landlords, small landlords in particular, their profits are declining greatly, okay, due to the eviction moratoriums, due to increased government regulation, etc. And in places like New York, it's even worse. It's even worse. So, if they had any common sense whatsoever, I don't believe that this Rent Guidelines Board actually looked at economics or anything. They, like this article says, they just made a political decision, because if they had, they would have said, hey, property taxes have gone up, utility costs have gone up, insurance costs have gone up, and even the cost for the mortgages that most of these properties have gone up, okay? If they look at the stats, if they went down and they even talked to a landlord and asked them about their individual expenses, the landlords themselves could have told them. Instead, they're trying to, we think that, no, don't, just stop lying. Just be honest and just say, well, we were trying to strike this balance. And you know what? The tenants are still not happy with it. Okay? The tenants still want to kick the Eric Adams guy out of office, and they think the Rent Guidelines Board is pure evil based on this minuscule rent raise. That's why I said, nothing you do will be able to please these socialists. Okay, nothing. Okay, you you give them an inch, they take a mile. They will complain about any rent increase, and their ultimate goal is basically they want free housing. Okay, they want free housing on the backs of the people who are actually working. Not, they don't want to pay anything. Yes, big corporations may be able to weather this latest hit, though don't count on them to sink much new money into new affordable housing, especially after Albany let an important tax break meant to spur such housing development expire this year. Yeah, I didn't do, I did cover that topic before. So basically there was a nice tax incentive for real estate developers to make some of the units inside of each of one of their new, developments affordable. But they took that tax break away. So now there's no incentive for developers to create new affordable housing. And you know what the result of that's going to be? They're just going to build all market rate units. Hey, that's fine by me. The more units, the better. However, that's not going to help people in the short term. But mom and pop owners won't. They'll struggle along for hoping for relief, meanwhile perhaps foregoing repairs or upgrades. It recalls the 70s and 80s when landlords let buildings decay or even abandon them. Progressives had ludicrously sought more... Oh man, I lost my place. Progressives had ludicrously sought more rent freezes and now gripe that the hikes are too high. Never mind tenants' generous COVID unemployment benefits, stimulus checks, higher wages being paid now given the tight labor market, and that many rent-regulated tenants are actually quite wealthy since there's no means testing for these apartments. Yep, and there's another fact that I keep bringing up, okay? Like they said, there's no means testing. You could be a doctor making $500,000 a year in a rent-controlled apartment. That's how ridiculous this whole thing is. Hey, we're trying to make housing more affordable, but there's no income test. There's no thing in there that says, well, these units are actually reserved for people who need affordable housing. No, you can have people who don't need affordable housing, and they are getting the benefits of this, okay? And it's just wrong. And, the other thing is, like they said, hey, while the pandemic was going on, the government was throwing money at people, okay? They were throwing, multiple stimulus checks at people, expanded federal unemployment benefits, there were huge tax returns and etc., right? And yet and still, they had the eviction moratorium going on. They had all these eviction protections up for tenants, so they should have been just collecting all the extra money they didn't have to pay on rent. They should have just been collecting it. Especially since they didn't really have a means test saying that people were actually facing economic hardship during COVID. But no, they didn't do that. So here we are. It's 2022, 2 years since the pandemic began, and people are complaining because, hey, their rent might go up $50 or $60 a month. Hey, man, the price of everything has increased. Don't think for 1 second that the landlord isn't affected by the exact same inflation that the tenant is affected by. Oh, it's actually quite annoying when I read some of this stuff. Even Mayor Eric Adams, who bragged of his success in pushing down the proposed hikes, nonetheless expressed disappointment. Higher rents will be a burden to tenants, he lamented. At least Adams also acknowledged the hardship for mom and pop owners and the likely consequences for tenants. Small landlords are at risk of bankruptcy because of years of no increases at all, threatening the quality of life for tenants who deserve to live in well-maintained modern buildings. The system is broken. He's right. Gotham has had rent regulation for 80 years, but has never gone a day during that time without a housing shortage. Fair market rents, on the other hand, encourage housing development and assure sufficient revenue to properly maintain buildings. Alas, in 2019, Albany rescinded even modest attempts to phase out some high-end rent-stabilized apartments. Don't expect that broken system to get fixed anytime soon. Yeah, great article there by the New York Post. Goes over, a lot of the same issues that I have with rent control and why I don't believe that this little minuscule increase that they're giving landlords is worth anything.